And welcome to the Aaron Katzman Show, where we speak to you about your life, your money, and your investments. And as always, we're coming to you from the spiritual and soon-to-be financial capital of the world, Jerusalem, Israel. As always, if you like this content, please hit the like button below. And if you've not yet done so, I don't know why you haven't yet done so, but if you've not yet done so, please subscribe to both our podcasts and our YouTube channel. We've got a really interesting show today because we're sort of doing a combination. We're going to do a combination of the continuing series we have on entrepreneurship, and we're going to talk a little bit of tax issues that Americans in Israel need to deal with. So it's my honor to introduce to the show Yosefa Huber, who is a CPA specializing in U.S. taxes for Americans living in Israel. She made Aliyah from South Florida in 2009. She started her career in international taxation in a large accounting firm in Tel Aviv. And in 2016, she opened up her own firm. Yosefa, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
I appreciate that. So let's speak first a little bit about tax, and then we'll jump into your story of being an entrepreneur. And also, you're going to be actually really informative for us because you'll be able to give us some tips, some tax tips that other entrepreneurs need to take into consideration. So we were speaking before the show, and you mentioned an issue that you get asked about a lot, and it's an issue that I get asked about a lot, and that's about the 10-year tax exemption for olim. Can you speak about what it is, what it's not?
It's not what it's not. Yeah, it's probably the most misunderstood, misinterpreted area of, it's really Israeli tax law. I'm a US CPA, but of course I bump into it a lot and people misinterpret it a lot. I think I've gotten 4 or 5 calls within the last 4 days of people that assumed it meant a lot of things it didn't mean. So what it is not an exemption from taxation completely in any jurisdiction. It is very specific. So it does not completely exempt you from all Israeli taxes or all US taxes. Really doesn't do much at all for your US taxes. It specifically exempts for new olim only. New olim or long-term, people who are out of the country for long-term. You need to speak with an Israeli accountant to see if you qualify. For their first 10 years of new olim, it is income that they actually earn abroad. So that can mean 2 things. For the most part, it refers to passive income. So that's when you're bumping into it the most, Aaron, I assume, is, if you open for a new olim, an account outside of Israel, then that actually is relevant for them. Or if somebody has a rental property that they come over, they have a rental property in the States, or, they move out of their apartment and start renting it out. So that's actually income from outside of Israel, and that would be exempt.
And that's considered passive income, right? Passive income that you get
passive
from investments
income.
or from royalties
Right.
or whatever, any kind of, dividends or what have you, right?
Yeah, and for me, I think the number one benefit there is not necessarily your bottom line taxes. It's really just one less accountant, one less jurisdiction that you have to deal with if you make Aliyah and you're not self-employed, you don't have a business, you just have, either you're retired or you are an employee of an Israeli company. You don't have to tell Israel about your investments back in the States right away. You eventually do, and you still have to keep telling the US, but you don't have to go and hire an Israeli accountant fresh off the boat if you don't have a business or something, for most people. Okay. So I think that's the number one, is it's one less thing to deal with. It is really unlikely to keep you from owing taxes completely on any income. In most cases, every bit of income is taxed in one place or another. In most cases, it's only taxed once, not less and not more. So you need to figure out who you're paying, who's the right person to pay. The other thing it can do is that if you're actually flying, you're leaving Israel, and you go, let's say you're a doctor and you work in New York for 2, 3, 4 months a year, and you're not doing that remotely, you're not doing consultations remotely, then the income you earn while you're actually in New York, that would be exempt. If you have anything in between, really, I mean, either way, but you need to speak with an Israeli accountant about the details, any subtleties, anything where you have a business, but like some of it is passive or, a partnership and things like that, it gets more complicated. But it's not as quite as all encompassing as a lot of people think.
And and in most cases, as you mentioned, there's usually not double taxation, right?
Right. In most cases, there's not, but there can be if you pay the wrong place first. So if you're paying US taxes for 10 years on income that, let's say you have an employer in the US, or you're a contractor of a company in the US, and you think that you're not supposed to be paying Israeli taxes for your first 10 years, you're paying US taxes for 10 years. And then once Israel catches up with you, Israel could easily want you to pay back 10 years back taxes, and you're not going to be able to get refunds for 10 years of back US taxes. So in most cases, when things are being done properly, there isn't double taxation.
Interesting. Let's change slightly. Let's turn a little bit and speak about you, and then we're going to get back to the tax. You were working, you made Aliyah, right? You took the plunge. You're one of the people who left South Florida. Now the South Florida is the rage. Everybody's moving there. Not so many people leaving, but you're a trendsetter, I guess. You left it.
I was always trying to leave South Florida. We ended up back there before making Aliyah. But
and you started working in a big accounting firm. Why did you decide to take the plunge and start your own business?
I had a baby and I didn't want to be commuting to Tel Aviv. I was living in Petah Tikva. So I'll tell you, when I first made Aliyah, I didn't work right away. I actually came with a job, and I had been offered a job by KPMG that I think was going to be in an Israeli tax department. It was contingent on me finishing Ulpan. And family things came up, and that didn't work out quite as well as I expected. And so several years into my Aliyah, then I started applying and got a job very quickly. It's a very in-demand field, for better or worse. And I got a job pretty quickly, thank God. And I worked at two different firms under the same manager, actually, both places, but two separate firms in Tel Aviv. And I learned a lot. And I'm really glad I took that and pushed myself. It wasn't easy. I had 4 kids already. It wasn't easy getting to Tel Aviv, but there's really no other way to learn international taxation. We don't learn it in the US. It's not on the CPA exams. You can't learn it from working with most US firms. It's really important for Americans living in Israel to find a US accountant in Israel who actually specializes in international taxation, because people in the US don't really know how to handle taxes for people living in Israel. It's a real specialty. And so I was very fortunate to find a job with a great teacher, and I learned a lot, and I still keep in touch with them. But the commute was, this was before COVID, when people were expected to come to an office, and it was not in the cards. So I thought I'd take on a few clients, and there's a lot of Americans that need taxes done. So it turned into a business pretty quickly.
And when so I guess the tax issues weren't such a big issue for you, but culturally, maybe because you're working with Americans, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe you don't feel it as much, but did you find starting having a business in a foreign country, in a foreign language, as an extra hurdle?
I didn't have a lot to compare it to, because I made Aliyah pretty much as soon as I finished my CPA exams. Being an employee in a foreign country was an adjustment. When I got the job, I was shown a certain desk surrounded by Americans, and when I showed up, they put me at a different desk. And it was my first 8-hour, 8.5, whatever it is in Israel, 8-hour, 20-minute day or whatever. And it was a big adjustment, but it did not take long before I became a workaholic and was the first person in and the last person to leave. That was a bigger adjustment. I think having my own business has allowed me to really kind of create my own little American bubble. My Hebrew is not great. I'm much more comfortable in English. I'm in a very in-demand field, so I can take just people who speak my language.
Right. And in terms of being a mother, obviously in your situation, it's probably, you know, a godsend that you've got your own business.
I mean, I'm not exactly a real hands-on homemaker or anything. As you know, with a new baby, it was absolutely necessary. And that flexibility was really important. But once my kids were in school, I was still at the office yesterday at 9:15 at night. I had gotten in at 8:30. So yes, I mean, it's great. It's great that I can make my own hours. It's great that I can take holidays off. Even though the Jewish holidays frequently coincide with US tax deadlines. The main deadline this year falls right in the middle of Sukkot. I have my own business, so I can say to my clients, we don't work on Sukkot. You have to send me your stuff earlier. Right. That's it. And I can say to my employees, you've done fine, you've done good work. And just because clients send things in during Sukkot does not mean you have to work. If you want to take off, go for it, enjoy your family. So I think that's one of the most important parts of my business is being able to create that for my employees. And yeah,
it's flexibility, right? On the one hand, any business owner, you have your own flexibility, but on the other hand, you got to get the work done. And
I do. It's a lot more pressure.
You can take off a week of holidays, but you still have to get the tax returns in.
I do. So it's a lot more pressure. It's a lot more risk.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. What would you say to somebody, because you started out what I think is a more logical way, right? Get a job first and then take the plunge. I mean, part of the series, we've spoken to a lot of people who didn't do that, who sort of came, they finished the army, they did whatever, and then bam, they just started a company. What would you sort of tell the, you know, let's say a family who's coming in and one of the partners is, you know, thinking of opening a business?
I mean, I talk to a lot of accountants coming, and I do. I love interacting with accountants, people who are coming, and I'm happy to talk to them, happy to try to point them in the right direction to help them with what they're looking for. Anybody who wants to be doing taxes for people in Israel has to. I mean, I say absolutely, please, please, please do not get off the boat and start doing taxes for your neighbors if you've been doing taxes for people living in the States all along. Either you keep your clients in the US and tell all your neighbors, no, I can't, or you have to get a job in Israel. But if you're not in a specialty where you need to do that, then I think it really depends on your lifestyle. So for example, a family, I really encourage, like, you know, a traditional family with at least one kid, that if they're able to, at least one parent needs to have a flexible job. So when I was working in Tel Aviv, my husband was working from home, and I couldn't have done it without that, because I would have been taking off all the time when they were sick. It's very difficult. Even though you do get sick leave and you do get vacation leave, it makes you feel not very nice, especially as a mother, to always be telling the boss, oh, I can't work, my kid is sick. So it's, if you're in, if your family is set up where that's a possibility, I do really encourage, at least one person to be in a flexible position. Obviously, it's not an option for everybody, but
it also, I think, eases the transition, right? That you have an income coming in. There's not that pressure, that we're starting a business and we're gonna live off of it right away, right? Which is, there's enough upheaval and change by coming here.
When we started, I thought I was going to be the main breadwinner. My husband was a librarian in the States. He was a librarian, like in the public library system, which is not so much of a career here. But he was also the person with the Hebrew skills. So at first he ended up starting a business because the children had some special needs that I needed to handle. And then now, because he's the one who can read all the forms and the homework and all that stuff, he's kind of the primary parent in our home for a lot of things. And he handles all the school and just kind of keeping up with that stuff. I'm amazed at mothers who take on all of it. And I know most do. I know, a significant amount, they have a lot in their head, but I have trouble, I can't serve my clients as well as I do if I also had to keep track of all the chugim and all the different things that the kids need for school. So
okay. Now we're going to combine the first part of the show with the second part of the show. And we've got you here, so we're going to take advantage of you and your expertise. Okay.
Yes.
What should olim or anybody, but olim who are thinking of starting a business on the tax side of things, which they generally don't think about so much until it's too late sometimes. What are some points they really, really need to think about and get in order before they start their business?
I think number one mistake I see is that people think that they can cut all ties with the US. It's happening less and less because I think every year our society grows more and more international and remote. But I still see people who think, they're going to make aliyah, they're going to cash out all their US funds and accounts and investments and completely be in Israel. And there's no reason to do that. You can shift slowly. But you still are going to have to keep reporting everything to the US and more. You're going to have to report once you move, you're going to have to start reporting all your Israeli bank accounts and anything you have in Israel. You have to report back to the US. And on top of that, if you are an entrepreneur, if you're not an employee, you also are going to have to engage an Israeli accountant. And I really strongly recommend that people hire separate people who specialize in both areas. An Israeli accountant who specializes in working with olim, and a US accountant who specializes in working with people in Israel. And there are a lot. It's not such a unique thing.
And does somebody who have a business here, we spoke about double taxation earlier, vis-a-vis maybe investments or whatever. Somebody opens up a coffee shop or a falafel store or a high-tech company, whatever it is, right? Do they have to worry about double taxation?
They could, yeah, for sure. So if you have a small business, in Israel, we call it osek pator or osek morshe. In the US, it would be the equivalent of self-employed, like something you would report on Schedule C. There's also in the US, you have an LLC. And so that can be sort of in between. You need to speak with a professional. But for our purposes, we have someone who's self-employed will still have some element of double taxation. If they're sitting in Israel doing their work in Israel all year, then they first pay income tax to Israel, but they'll still have the social security element that they'll pay to both countries. So they'll be paying into Israeli bituach leumi, and they'll also be paying back to the US in what's called a self-employment tax, mostly social security, and also includes Medicare. So there is that element.
And does somebody who incorporates, right? That's always the question, right? Should you be self-employed or incorporate? So there are advantages and disadvantages. What would be some of the advantages and disadvantages of incorporating?
So beyond the legal advantages, obviously, limited liability, things like that. So the main reason that US citizens tend to incorporate is to get out of their social security taxes. So if you incorporate your Israeli business, you can then be an employee of an Israeli corporation. You're no longer an employee of a US corporation or a US person. As long as you're an employee of either yourself, a US citizen, or a US company, you have to be paying into Medicare and Social Security. But if you're an employee of an Israeli company, you don't. So by incorporating your business, you can then be an employee of that business, and you get out of that. So that's the main upside. That can be a big upside, but it doesn't simplify things. So it does not by any means get you out of US taxes. If anything, it can be a bit more complicated. You should generally expect your Israeli accounting fees to go up by maybe about 10 times. And your US tax fees also would go up significantly because there is a lot of reporting. If you are someone who tends to be prone to maybe filing late, not always getting your stuff in on time, I wouldn't recommend it, because even if you're saving money on Social Security, you then have this looming potential penalty. There's additional forms that you have to file if you have a foreign corporation. And if you're late with that, there's a $10,000 penalty automatically. So all the money that you're saving with Social Security is going to go down the drain if you're late with your taxes even one time. So you need to think about that. Also, even though dollar for dollar, there's a certain point where you might be saving money on a year-to-year basis. Do you want that extra money to be going towards an Israeli account and a US account so we can put our kids through college, or do you want it to be going into your own Social Security? So you have to, there's no one simple solution. There's no one threshold. I prefer to look at it on a holistic basis. Are you someone who can handle having a corporation? Because there is a lot more involved in that, but it can be a good option for a lot of people.
Interesting. One more question for Yosefa. What tip would you have for anybody who's coming here and thinking about starting a business? Because you've done it, but you also see a lot of people who've done it. So you have an interesting, interesting perspective. What would be one tip? Not to put you on the spot, but one tip.
Yeah. I don't want to seem self-serving here, but honestly, finding professionals who know your area, who specialize in what you need, is so important. People who you can communicate with, people who speak your language. And I have at least a couple videos on my YouTube channel about how to find an accountant who's right for you. It's so important to me. It's something I do a lot of, is helping people, I don't have time and capacity to do everyone's taxes, but I really love helping people find the accountant who's appropriate for their needs. If you can't talk to your accountant, if you're not comfortable asking questions of your accountant and trusting their answers and knowing that they're available, you could easily get into trouble, or you could, if someone is scared to talk to their accountant because either they feel embarrassed or it's hard for them because there's a language barrier and they just don't have time to think how they're going to say it in Hebrew, they're not going to ask that question, and they could easily do something that is not in their best interest. So, hiring your US accountant or Israeli accountant if you need one, financial advisors, portfolio managers, all the doctors for that matter, people who you can actually talk to, who you will ask questions of, is really, really important.
That's a good tip. I like that tip. Yosefa, before we say goodbye, how can people contact you?
Okay, I think you can start with my website. It's Yosefa. No, it's not. It's hubertaxcpa.com. I'm sure you'll link it below. I'm
going to have it in the notes. We'll have all.
You'll link it in the comments. I am on Facebook. I am on YouTube. I have an email address. You can put it on the comments.
That's great. Yosefa, thanks so much for taking part in the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
And you've been tuning into the Aaron Katzman Show. We speak about your life, your money, and your investments. As always, once again, if you like this show, if you like any of the shows, please hit the like button below, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel and to our podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll speak to you soon.